Alright. Hello. Welcome back to my channel. So it is well past 1 o'clock in the morning. I've been playing around on book tags. Dangerous thing for me to be doing in the middle of the night. But my sleep schedule has gone back to a little bit more to my old night owlness. Thanks to Dewey's readathon. I did make all 24 hours of the readathon. So now I'm back to thinking bedtime should be around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, which used to be my normal. I wouldn't mind if I could just do that all the time, but grown-up life has so many things that even if you don't have a job and you theoretically have all the time in the world, you still end up having to get up in the morning a lot. So I don't get to do the staying up until 3 or 4 and going to bed then and getting up at 11 or noon. I don't usually sleep more than 7 hours if I get to sleep when I want to, but my sleep is usually from about 3 o'clock in the morning until about 10 or 11 o'clock. And then I'm well rested and I'm quite happy. And I wouldn't mind if I just could do that, but I have a feeling there's more mornings this week, so after tonight, I'll have to behave. But so I was watching Aaron Facer's video about his Western Canon book tag, which, watching other people's takes on it, most people when they think Western Canon, you automatically start with the Greeks, the Romans, Beowulf, and other early literature from Europe, and then we go from there to kind of pre-World War era, kind of nebulous. We get Dickens, we get Jane Austen, and we move in from there, and then we get into the World War eras. And if you're limiting yourself to 20 books, by the time you get through with World War II, most of your books are by men. Almost all of your books are written by white people. Most of your books were originally written in English or French. And it's not very diverse. It's the same list as everybody else's. And if you are from somewhere that's on the other side of the ocean, like the US or Canada or South America, you're not represented very much in there. So, yeah, I like the idea of kind of the way Aaron first describes his tag about pulling books from the shelf to represent your reading of Western literature. So my take on this tag is definitely not books that most people have included on their list. I'll put it that way. And I was thinking, like, if I was gonna pick 20 books that have some substance to them, that if you read them all, you really get a nice rounded sort of concept of a people and a place and a time, and of what it means to be a modern, kind of well-read, well-educated Westerner. It's hard to do in 20 books, and you miss a lot no matter what you do. But I think these 20 books capture a lot. And I did include Beowulf. I was like, well, we need something ancient. But the Beowulf I included is not the old Beowulf. And that's going to be kind of the theme here. Pulling more modern books that still have that depth and the breadth of information and ideas and perspectives. So the first book is Beowulf by Caitlin R. Kiernan. This is a sort of retelling of Beowulf that puts you in the time and the place and the people of the story of Beowulf. And I really liked her take on it. If I was teaching it, I would also assign the more traditional Beowulf. But I think that I'd read Beowulf probably 5 or 6 times in more traditional formats before I read this book. So I already knew the story, but I'd never really felt it like that before. So highly recommended. Book 2 is Germinal by Emile Zola, because it's important to know what it looks like if you don't have unions and labor rights, which is the case in Germinal. It's a story set in a mining community, coal mining, I believe, and it's following a family with kids, and you get to see what life is like for them and how miserable it is, and all these things that modern day, there's no way you'd get away with that, at least not in the US. Not in the US, in places that most of us live. I'm sure there are places where labor rights are flouted and children are put to work in horrible conditions still, but it's not the norm. So I think that's an important concept, and it's a really excellent novel for getting at that concept. Number 3 is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. Although I almost included Winter of Our Discontent instead. The Winter of Our Discontent is set more in the central U.S., and East of Eden is set more in California. Both are excellent, but it's just which part of the U.S. we want to have Steinbeck's perspective on. But the U.S. is different from Europe in that we really don't have as old a history. Most of what we have, most of our places and our stories are not the same kind of rooted as European stories. And it changes, I think, the way we see everything. So I would be including Steinbeck because he captures some of the how things get the way they are sort of stories. And especially if you're not from the U.S., you might not really understand what that feels like or looks like. So that's Steinbeck. And I'm always amazed in lists that come out of Britain that Steinbeck's not represented more. And then I forget, but Steinbeck is American stories, and we don't get a lot of American stories in the traditional canon. Okay, so that's book 3. Book 4 is August 1914 by Alexandr Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn is obviously Russian, and maybe not included in the West, but it's certainly from World War I of 1914, puts us nicely in World War I. Prussia versus Russia. And it's absolutely hilarious in a sad sort of way. It's one of the only war books that actually made me laugh out loud while reading it, which is not what I expected from a war novel. But what it also does is it makes it easier to understand what a campaign of war looks like in that kind of time, where technology is not, lobbing guided missiles at each other. And modern day warfare actually still has a lot of the same elements and a lot of the same capacity for screwing up. So I think I learned a lot more about how war actually works on the ground, like what it looks like, what it feels like, what the concerns are when you're trying to plan a campaign. It's just a great book all around, and not one that most people have read, but people should be reading that one. It's a good book. I should probably stop saying that so much because all of them are books that people should read them. They're good books. Book 5 is actually one that makes it on some people's canon lists, even when they're just 20 books. The Forsyte Saga by John Galsworthy. This book is about a family that spans the era before World War I and during and after World War I. So we get to see how society is changing rapidly and increasingly rapidly through this span. So it's still World War I in part, but now it's the social side. So we're seeing, what it's doing to, long established families that used to be quite comfortable, that all these things are changing around them, and how do you deal with it, and what has to change in order to be able to deal with it. What costs are involved in adapting to the new society when you were in a family that was doing really well in the old version. So I thought that was a really good novel for capturing that kind of idea of what things were like and why. It's set in Britain, but not the United States. So the next one's also set in Britain. The Night Watch by Sarah Waters. So now we're getting into World War II. The Night Watch is about female ambulance drivers during the London Blitz. So it's a fascinating subject. We actually get some non-heterosexuality as well, but not the sort of thing that's typical in like the Boxall 1001 list and the Guardian list, and it's not the point of the book. They just happen to sometimes have girlfriends. So I really like this book. It captures a side of the World War II that we don't see very often. People that are kind of left behind, that are back at home trying to keep things going while the men are out fighting. But because it's wartime, these women that otherwise might not have worked, they might have been housewives and just, cooking and cleaning and raising babies, now they are driving ambulances to where the bombs have just fallen, to pull bodies out of the rubble, and it's so decidedly not a ladylike job, and so there's all sorts of interesting stuff to this novel, and just an excellent work of modern literature that more people should read. The next one is set in the United States and is the beginning of a series. And it's just a lovely novel that captures life in the West in the United States, which is a perspective I don't see often enough in lists. And I'm not going to say too much about it because it's really it's a beautiful book and people should read it. And it's kind of in the same category as way too many of the books on the 1001 lists and the 1000 lists, and where they just throw these books on like, you should read this book, it's good. So I'm going to do that with this book. You should read this book, it's good. Plainsong by Kent Haruf. Kent Haruf writes really beautiful books. They tend to be set in the American West in a more modern era, but some of them start out in the 50s or even earlier, and some of them are quite a bit more modern, but very lyrical, and a setting that I almost never see in literature. So, yeah. I'm filling a void. The next book is A Book of American Martyrs by Joyce Carol Oates. So, this is one that gets at quite a lot of the heavy issues in modern society in the United States, in which so Luther, the main character in this novel, is an ardent evangelical who believes that he's carrying out God's will by being a terrorist attacking abortion clinics. So this book, all in one thing, gets at domestic terrorism and abortion rights and women's rights and the evangelical movement in the central United States. And it's not an easy book, but I've not encountered very many books that even address all that, let alone in a book that accomplishes it so well. I would never have imagined that I could be even marginally sympathetic with a character like the main character in this one. And, I may have only achieved marginal sympathy with this guy, but that's still a huge accomplishment. And it really allows the reader to imagine at least the perspectives of these different people that all believe that they are doing the right thing. And it makes it a little easier to deal with the people in real life that are in those different roles in this issue. And for modern readers, this is one of the big issues that every election year comes back, and it's a live issue, and one that we need to be talking about a lot more, and talking about and thinking about critically. So had to be on my list. Not one that would be easy to teach, and I would imagine that I would be doing lots of little caveats before the day of the lecture. Okay, everybody needs to, really think about the perspective that's not theirs, and it would be hard to teach, but I think it's an important one. The next one is Malinche by Laura Esquival. This book is actually following a native translator that is kind of kept by the conquistadors to translate for them in Mexico. And it's a different perspective on the conquistadors and the development of Central America and South America as colonies. Laura Esquival is better known for other books. I think Malinche is fairly recent, but it's a unique perspective that I think really belongs on this list. Sort of a modern classic that if more people read it, it would be included in 100 years in the new canon. Next one is an older book, The Power and the Glory by Greene. This book is about a Catholic priest in Mexico that is on the run. Catholicism is prohibited. He's being hunted. If the authorities catch him, he will be imprisoned and probably killed. And he's going around and performing his duties as a priest underground in Mexico. Really a good book, and sort of story that you see it set in other places, but not a time period that we have a lot of literature about. So I like that book. And it's really well done, and it's long, but it didn't feel as long as some of the other books I read by Graham Greene. So next book, We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver. This book actually makes it on some recommended lists. It might be on the Guardian 1000 novels list, but this one is important for modern readers because of all the school shootings and the guns in school and that whole issue. Kevin has been arrested, having become a school terrorist of sorts. He's got some mental problems, and his mother has to reconcile herself to the fact that her son has done these things and try to figure out how this happened. And it really gets at how these things do happen. Why do we have kids showing up at school and killing other kids and teachers, and how does this happen? One of those issues that, again, it's in the news all the time. It's one of our big issues, but it's very rare that we read books about it. So that is on my modern canon. I guess maybe that's what I'm doing here, the modern canon. I don't know. And I'm sure that my 20 books would be different in another couple years. So I'll revisit this tag next year, the year after that. See what I would change out. Book 12 is The Farming of Bones by Edwidge Danticat. Edwidge Danticat, yes. I listened to some audiobooks of hers, and the way I used to pronounce her name was really not the way the audiobook readers pronounce her name, and they seem to be consistent. So Edwidge Danticat. Anyway, The Farming of Bones is about more recent violence and atrocities in the Dominican Republic and Haiti, the island. That it's amazing how much great literature comes out of that violence. And it's also amazing how few people seem to know about all the stuff that went on there. And it's not that far from the United States. It's, there's a little bit of water between us and that. And there are a lot of people in the United States that fled that violence. And it's a good book about how these things happen and why they happen and what it's like to survive them. And just a remarkable novel that's worth reading. Tortuga by Rudolfo Anaya comes in at 13. Tortuga is an unusual novel. It's not about a war. It's not about an uprising. It's not about violence against anybody by anybody else. It's about a boy who has sustained a spinal cord injury to his neck that it could leave him paralyzed for the rest of his life, but it could also maybe heal. And he's in a ward to recover from this injury if he can. And so he's in this full body cast to keep his spine from moving while it heals so that he doesn't become permanently paralyzed. And unlike some of the other books on this list, unlike a lot of the books on this list, it's more looking inward. And what does it mean to be yourself, and what does it mean to be disabled? There are not a lot of disabled people in the classic canon. And I happen to be disabled. So I notice after a while that there's a part of my identity that is never represented in the classic canon. So I really appreciate books that don't put disabilities on a pedestal or romanticize them in weird ways, but that still acknowledge that there are people that have these limitations that are still human. And Tortuga is an amazing novel. If you haven't read it, if you haven't heard of it before, it's lovely. It's one of the first Rudolfo Anaya novels that I read that really just drew me in. So, not one that a lot of people have heard of. A lot of people, if they've read Rudolfo Anaya, they've read Bless Me Ultima, which is nice. It's a good novel. But I put Tortuga on the list because I want some representation on here for people that have bodies that are not what everybody expects. The next one is The Cellist of Sarajevo by Stephen Galloway. Definitely more modern book that gets at kind of the spirit of survival through horrible things. That, we have horrible things happening every year now. And during these things, the people in those horrible things, there's always someone that finds a way to rise above whatever horrible stuff is going on, to create beauty in the midst of all the ugliness. And I think that concept of humanity is part of what makes us worth saving as a species. So I really like this book for kind of zeroing in on that idea of humanity in the face of terribleness. The next one is more where the terribleness comes from. What Came Before He Shot Her by Elizabeth George. Not a book that you're likely to see on most people's canon lists, and it's not on any recommended lists that I've come across, like the long list. And Elizabeth George is murder mystery author. But What Came Before He Shot Her is situated partway through a series by Elizabeth George, the Inspector Lynley series. And the book right before this one, Inspector Lynley finds out that his wife and child have been murdered. And his whole world comes to a standstill. And so then we go to this book. I read this book before I read any of the rest of the series. And you actually don't need to read the series to read this book. It starts out with the kid that murdered Inspector Lynley's wife and child. And we follow this kid through all of what makes him into the person that shows up with the gun and kills Lynley's wife and kid. So this book really captures how these kinds of crimes, how the people that do them happen, how our society makes these things happen, where these people come from, how they became these people, why there wasn't another path that they could have taken instead, or could they? This is one of those books where I wish that I'd been reading it with other people to discuss it when I read it, because there's so much to discuss in this novel. So not one that's on most people's lists, and most people that read murder mysteries haven't read this book. But totally not what I expected at all. And a book that I think everybody should read. It's on my books that everyone should read before they die list, for sure. The next one is The Bridge of San Luis Rey by Thornton Wilder. This one might be one of the ones that gets swapped out in the future. I almost swapped it out a couple times making my list. But it's a lovely book. It's one that's a story inside a story. A group of people are crossing a footbridge that's like a rope bridge over a narrow chasm, and the bridge collapses and they die. That is the outside layer of the story. And then within that, we get the stories of the people up to where they fell into the chasm. The structure of the novel is beautiful. The stories of the different people are lovely. And it's set in South America, 1800s, going into 1900s. I think late 1800s. It's been a little while since I read it, so it feels to me like 1800s. But I'd have to reread it again, and it is on my stack of books that I need to reread, so that will happen. And maybe it will definitely be on my canon still by next year. Next one is A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. Looking at more modern life and that sort of mental illness epidemic that we're seeing, and how that looks and how it feels. And a lot of people relate to this book because we do have a mental health epidemic. And it really captures that feeling of just not being quite right. And there's not really anything to do about it, and there's nothing acute to complain about. It's just not quite right. And yeah. Hopefully in 100 years no one can relate to that, but the way things are going, it might be one of those modern classics that lasts. The next one is Old Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Gabriel Garcia Marquez is from South America, so American continent author. And the book is set in Europe. Italy, I believe. Yeah. So this one is also possibly going to be swapped out. I wanted a book that captures the idea of living during an epidemic. And I think there may be others that I would swap in for that. But I haven't found the right one yet. And that might be one where a sci-fi sort of futuristic dystopia sort of book goes in there. But I haven't decided yet. And then the last two, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil by John Berendt. This is a lovely book. If you haven't read it, you should. The movie is also good, with John Cusack in it. Yeah, this one gets at a lot of social justice issues, and it's just a lovely story. Lovely writing. And then Alaska by James A. Michener. An epic novel that starts with the island's birth and goes all the way to modern Alaska and everything in between. So that is my list of 20. I've gone 33, almost 34 minutes now and counting. So definitely not one of my short videos. Sorry about that. I will try to do the one next year to replace this one, either shorter, or by then I'll have learned a lot more editing and I can put those little chapter thingies along the bottom so you can find the books. I don't know how to do that yet, so for now, this is a long one, and my guess is I'm the only one that's going to watch it. But I will watch it in a year and see if I still agree with it. If you have made it to the end and have any comments on the books I've listed, please leave me your comments on them. And if you want to do the tag, I will leave the instructions for the original Western Canon book tag in the description. And yeah, I'm going to get off now before this gets ridiculously long. I'll do a TBR video tomorrow for this next week of October. But for now, I'm going to get ready and go to bed because it's past 2 o'clock now. So, talk to you later, guys. Have a good night. Bye.